The surface of Morrison Lake reflected the brilliant July sun like a sheet of polished glass. Tom Reynolds adjusted his baseball cap, shielding his eyes from the glare as he secured the small wooden rowboat to the weathered dock. His daughter Olivia bounced impatiently beside him, her blonde pigtails bobbing with excitement. "Can we go now, Daddy? Please?" The 10-year-old clutched her plastic bucket of fishing supplies, already imagining the trout they would catch. "Almost ready, Liv," Tom replied, tightening the final knot. "Remember what I told you about safety on the water?" Olivia rolled her eyes dramatically but recited dutifully, "Always wear my life jacket, stay seated, and listen to what you say." Tom smiled and ruffled her hair. "That's my girl." Neither noticed the figure watching from the tree line, partially hidden behind a thick pine trunk. The morning had started like any other summer Saturday in Pinewood, Wyoming. The small lakeside community came alive during the warmer months, though Morrison Lake remained relatively quiet compared to the more popular tourist destinations. Tom had promised Olivia this father-daughter fishing trip for weeks, a rare day off from his job at the local hardware store. "Got the sandwiches?" Tom asked, mentally checking their supplies. "Mom packed them," Olivia confirmed, patting her small backpack decorated with hand-drawn flowers and butterflies. "Peanut butter for me, turkey for you." They climbed into the boat, the wood creaking beneath their weight. Tom's hands gripped the worn wooden oars, family heirlooms passed down from his grandfather, who had fished these same waters decades ago. The right oar bore a distinctive notch where young Tom had once dropped it against a rock. As they pushed away from the dock, several other visitors waved from the small beach area. The Reynolds were well known in Pinewood. Tom coached Little League, and his wife Ellen taught second grade at the elementary school. "Let's head toward Eagle Point," Tom suggested, rowing steadily. "The big ones always hide in the shadows of those rocks." The boat glided smoothly across the water, leaving ripples in its wake. Olivia trailed her fingers in the cool lake, humming softly. Neither noticed the faint sound of a motorboat engine in the distance. By noon, they had caught 3 decent-sized trout. Olivia beamed with pride at her contribution, the largest fish among them. "Mom's gonna be so impressed," she declared, admiring their catch. Dark clouds began gathering on the horizon, the wind picking up slightly. "Looks like we might get some rain," Tom observed, glancing at the sky. "Maybe we should start heading back." "Just a little longer?" Olivia pleaded. "I want to catch one more." Tom checked his watch. 20 more minutes, then we really have to go." That 20 minutes would stretch into eternity. Back at the lakeside community, Ellen Reynolds glanced at the kitchen clock for the 3rd time that hour. Tom had promised they'd be home by 3, and it was now approaching 5. The weather forecast had mentioned potential thunderstorms, and the darkening sky outside her window confirmed it. When 6 o'clock came with no sign of them, Ellen called the sheriff's office. "They're probably just waiting out the storm somewhere along the shore," Sheriff Mike Donovan assured her, though something in his voice suggested he was already concerned. "But I'll take the patrol boat out and look for them." By nightfall, 3 boats were searching the lake. Flashlights swept across the water's surface. Voices called out names that echoed unanswered. They found nothing. No boat, no life jackets floating on the surface, no sign of struggle or accident. Tom and Olivia Reynolds had vanished without a trace. The days that followed brought search teams with dogs, divers exploring the lake's murky depths, and helicopters scanning the surrounding forests. Community members formed search parties, combing every inch of shoreline and nearby woods. The Reynolds rowboat never surfaced. The lake was dragged extensively, revealing nothing but old tires and fishing equipment. Ellen Reynolds moved mechanically through the following weeks, existing rather than living, jumping at every phone ring, hoping for news. The case file remained open, but active investigation eventually dwindled. Theories ranged from drowning to voluntary disappearance, though those who knew Tom dismissed the latter immediately. Some whispered about the strange recluse, Frank Mercer, who lived in a cabin on the far side of the lake, but investigations yielded nothing suspicious. Seasons changed, years passed. The small memorial bench installed at Morrison Lake weathered under sun and snow. Ellen never remarried, never moved away, always waiting for answers that never came, until 11 years later, when everything changed. May 1997 brought unusually heavy rainfall to Pinewood, raising Morrison Lake to record levels. As the waters receded, they revealed secrets long buried in the silty lake bed. Martin Cooper, an early-season fisherman, noticed something peculiar protruding from the mud about 20 yards from the shoreline. Initially thinking it was just a broken branch, he waded closer. What he pulled from the muck was a wooden oar with a distinctive notch. Sheriff Mike Donovan had aged considerably in 11 years. His once dark hair was now streaked with gray, and the lines around his eyes had deepened into permanent creases. When the call came in about Martin Cooper's discovery, he'd been behind his desk reviewing budget reports, a task he despised but couldn't avoid in his position. "Found what?" he asked, pressing the phone closer to his ear, not quite believing what he was hearing. "An oar, Sheriff," repeated Deputy Jensen, "and Cooper thinks it might be from the Reynolds case." Donovan was in his cruiser within minutes, heart hammering in his chest. The Reynolds disappearance had haunted him for over a decade, the one case he couldn't solve, couldn't even begin to explain. He'd been forced to watch as Ellen Reynolds withered away, hope fading from her eyes with each passing year. The shoreline was muddy from the receding floodwaters, his boots sinking ankle-deep as he approached Cooper and Jensen. The fisherman stood clutching the wooden oar like it was something sacred. "Found it right over there." Cooper pointed toward the lake. "Water's lower than I've ever seen it. Bunch of stuff getting uncovered." Donovan took the oar, turning it over in his weathered hands. The wood was darkened and warped from years underwater, but the craftsmanship was unmistakable. And there, the notch on the right oar. He remembered Tom's father mentioning it during the initial investigation. "This is Reynolds, all right," he confirmed quietly. "Bag it and get it to the station. And I want a team out here searching this entire area." By afternoon, the shoreline was crowded with officers and volunteers combing the newly exposed lakebed. Ellen Reynolds stood at the water's edge, arms wrapped around herself, watching silently as searchers methodically grid-searched the area. "We're going to need the state police dive team back out here," Donovan told his deputy. "And I want every inch of this shoreline examined before the water rises again." That's when Sarah Collins arrived. The young detective had transferred to Pinewood from Denver 6 months earlier, bringing big city experience and fresh eyes to the small department. At 32, she'd already built a reputation for solving cold cases. "Sheriff," she nodded professionally as she approached. "Heard about the oar. Any other findings?" "Nothing yet, but this is the first physical evidence we've had in 11 years. Collins surveyed the scene with analytical precision. "The lake level's down almost 15 feet from normal. If there's anything to find, now's our chance." She was right. By sunset, they had recovered more than just an oar. A volunteer named Richard Meadows found it, a small pink backpack half buried in mud about 40 yards from where the oar had been discovered. The once bright fabric was now stained and deteriorated, but the hand-drawn flowers and butterflies were still faintly visible. Olivia's backpack. Ellen identified it immediately, tears streaming down her face as she touched the fabric with trembling fingers. "This is hers. She decorated it herself." Inside, preserved in a sealed plastic sandwich bag, they found a child's drawing of a stick figure family holding hands, labeled Mommy, Daddy, and Me, in crooked handwriting. The care taken to protect this drawing spoke volumes. "Tom must have known something was wrong," Ellen whispered. "He always told Olivia to put important things in plastic if they went on the water." The search intensified. State police arrived with ground-penetrating radar to examine the lakebed. News vans parked along the normally quiet access road to Morrison Lake. The Reynolds case, long relegated to occasional mentions on missing persons websites, suddenly captured national attention again. 3 days into the renewed search, they found the shoe. It wasn't Tom's or Olivia's. A men's size 11 work boot, a brand not sold in Pinewood, lodged between rocks near the deepest part of the lake. The leather was decomposed, but the rubber sole remained intact, preserving a distinctive tread pattern. "This doesn't match anything in Tom's possessions," Donovan confirmed after checking with Ellen. "So we potentially have a third person involved?" Collins theorized, examining photographs of the boot in the evidence room. Someone who lost their footwear in whatever happened out there. But the most disturbing discovery came on the 4th day. A waterproof camera case washed up on the eastern shore, a battered Polaroid camera inside. The film was ruined, except for one partially developed photograph protected by its position in the camera. The image showed the Reynolds dock, taken from the trees on the opposite shore. In the grainy photo, Tom and Olivia could be seen loading their boat, unaware they were being photographed. The timestamp on the photo's edge read, 07/22/86, the day they disappeared. Someone was watching them, Collins stated, examining the photo under bright lights. This wasn't a random accident or a drowning. Sheriff Donovan stared at the ghostly image, a cold certainty settling in his stomach. This was planned. That evening, as the search teams packed up for the day, Collins drove to the address listed in the old case files for Frank Mercer, the reclusive man who'd lived on the far side of the lake in 1986. The cabin stood abandoned, vines crawling up its weather-beaten walls. According to county records, Mercer had moved away in late 1986, just months after the Reynolds disappeared. No forwarding address was ever filed. As Collins walked the overgrown property, her flashlight beam caught something metallic beneath the sagging porch. Crouching down, she brushed away years of accumulated leaves and dirt. A rusted tin box emerged, its lock broken long ago by exposure to the elements. Inside lay a collection of newspaper clippings about the Reynolds case, a map of Morrison Lake with cryptic markings, and most disturbingly, a small butterfly hair clip identical to the ones Olivia wore in her last school photo. Collins's hand reached for her radio. "Sheriff," she called, her voice steady despite the chill running down her spine. "I think we need to find out everything we can about Frank Mercer." The case was no longer just a mystery. It was now officially a criminal investigation. Frank Mercer's past unraveled like a frayed rope under Detective Collins' persistent investigation. Born Franklin James Mercer in Idaho, 1952, his history revealed a troubling pattern of movement and suspicious timing. Before settling in Pinewood, he had lived in 5 different states, always in isolated areas near bodies of water. More disturbing was the discovery that in 3 of those locations, people had gone missing, cases that remained unsolved. He worked odd jobs, mostly as a handyman or seasonal fisherman, Collins reported, spreading documents across the conference table in the sheriff's office. Never stayed anywhere longer than 3 years. Arrived in Pinewood in 1984, left suddenly in November 1986. 3 months after the Reynolds disappeared, Donovan noted, studying a grainy DMV photo of Mercer. A thin-faced man with hollow eyes and a scraggly beard. Collins nodded. His last known residence was in Oregon, but he vanished from there in 1990. No credit card activity, no tax returns, nothing in 7 years. "You think he's dead?" Donovan asked. "Or he's living completely off the grid," Collins replied. "Either way, the timeline and evidence we've found make him our primary suspect." Ellen Reynolds sat silently at the end of the table, absorbing every detail. 11 years had etched permanent sorrow into her features, but the recent discoveries had kindled something new in her eyes, a desperate hunger for answers. "Did he know my family?" she asked quietly. "Was there any connection?" Collins hesitated. "We found no direct link yet. Tom didn't work with him, and we've checked school records. He had no contact with Olivia that we can find." "Then why them?" Ellen's voice cracked. The question hung heavy in the air. No one had an answer. The investigation expanded, drawing resources from the FBI due to the possibility of a serial offender. Mercer's photograph was distributed nationwide. Forensic teams continued examining items recovered from the lake, but years underwater had destroyed most DNA evidence. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marjorie Winters, a 73-year-old resident of Pinewood, approached the sheriff's office after seeing Mercer's photo on the evening news. "He used to buy bait at my husband's shop," she explained, hands trembling slightly as she sipped the coffee Collins had offered. "Quiet man, kept to himself, but I remember him watching that little Reynolds girl whenever she'd come in with her daddy. Had a strange look about him. Made my skin crawl." Collins leaned forward. "Did you ever see him interact with her?" "Not directly, but once I saw him pick up a hair ribbon she'd dropped. Instead of returning it, he pocketed it when no one was looking." Marjorie shuddered at the memory. "I didn't think much of it then. Now, I can't forgive myself for not saying something." The search of the lakebed continued through summer, yielding more evidence. Fishing tackle from the Reynolds boat, a waterlogged life jacket with Olivia's name faded but still visible on the collar, and most significantly, a partial hull fragment identified as belonging to their rowboat. The wood showed signs of impact damage. This wasn't natural deterioration, the forensic expert explained, pointing to splintered edges. Something struck this boat with considerable force. The theory solidified. Mercer had been stalking the Reynolds, particularly Olivia. On that July day, he followed them onto the lake, rammed their boat, and then, what? The absence of bodies remained the most troubling aspect of the case. 6 weeks into the renewed investigation, a forest ranger discovered an abandoned hunting cabin 15 miles west of Morrison Lake. The primitive structure wasn't on any property maps. Built illegally on national forest land, likely decades ago. Inside, Collins and Donovan found walls covered with newspaper clippings about missing persons cases spanning 20 years. A collection of personal items, hair ribbons, a child's bracelet, a man's wedding ring, were displayed like trophies on a crude shelf. And there, among the macabre collection, was a small wooden picture frame containing a photograph of Olivia Reynolds at her school desk, clearly taken without knowledge or permission. "This is where he brought them," Collins whispered, surveying the isolated cabin, or at least where he planned everything. Forensic teams descended on the location, scouring every inch for evidence. Ground-penetrating radar examined the surrounding earth for disturbed soil. Cadaver dogs searched the perimeter. Behind the cabin, they found what they'd been dreading. Freshly disturbed earth revealed 2 shallow graves. The excavation was conducted with painstaking care, each layer of soil carefully removed. Ellen Reynolds waited at the sheriff's office, refusing to go home until there was news. When Donovan's call finally came, she collapsed into a chair, bracing for the worst. But the graves didn't contain Tom and Olivia Reynolds. Instead, they found the remains of an adult male, estimated to be in his 50s at time of death, tentatively identified through dental records as Frank Mercer himself. The second grave contained partial remains of an unidentified woman. "I don't understand," Ellen whispered when Donovan delivered the news. "If Mercer is dead, then who?" Collins spread a new set of photographs across the table. "We found these hidden in a lockbox under the cabin floor." The images showed Frank Mercer with another man, similar in appearance, perhaps a relative. In several photos, they were standing beside Morrison Lake. "We believe Frank Mercer had an accomplice," Collins explained. "Possibly a brother or cousin. We're running the images through facial recognition now." As she spoke, Deputy Jensen burst into the room, his expression urgent. "Sheriff, we just got a call from a ranger station in Montana. A man matching our second suspect's description was spotted an hour ago. He panicked when he saw the wanted poster and fled in a blue pickup. Donovan was already reaching for his jacket." "How far?" "About 2 hours north. State police are setting up roadblocks." Collins turned to Ellen. "We're close, Mrs. Reynolds. Closer than we've ever been." For the first time in 11 years, Ellen Reynolds allowed herself to hope, not for a reunion, but at least for the truth about what happened on Morrison Lake that summer day in 1986. What no one realized was that the truth would prove far more twisted than any of them had imagined. The blue pickup truck sped north on Route 89, kicking up dust as it veered onto a seldom-used logging road in Gallatin National Forest. Behind the wheel, Raymond Mercer, identified through fingerprint matches as Frank's younger brother, gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. At 58, his appearance had changed considerably from the photographs found in the cabin, but the hollow eyes remained the same, a Mercer family trait. 3 police cruisers followed at a distance, coordinating their pursuit over crackling radios. Sheriff Donovan and Detective Collins were in the lead vehicle, tension hanging thick between them as they navigated the uneven terrain. "He's heading toward the old mining district," the Montana state trooper driving their vehicle informed them. "Lots of abandoned tunnels up there. Perfect place to disappear, or make a last stand," Donovan muttered, checking his sidearm. The chase ended abruptly when Raymond's truck skidded on loose gravel and slammed into a tree. By the time officers approached with weapons drawn, he had fled into the dense forest on foot. A search perimeter was established, helicopter support requested. As darkness fell, flashlight beams crisscrossed through the trees, voices calling out commands echoing in the mountain air. It was Collins who spotted him first, a shadow moving between abandoned mining equipment. "Police, stop!" she shouted, giving chase as Raymond Mercer disappeared into the gaping entrance of an old mine shaft. Donovan caught up seconds later, both officers pausing at the mine entrance, flashlights illuminating only the first few yards of the tunnel before darkness swallowed the light. "Raymond Mercer," Donovan called into the blackness. "Come out with your hands up. There's nowhere to go." Silence answered him, then a voice, scratchy and thin, echoed from the depths. "You don't understand what happened. None of you do." Collins stepped forward cautiously. "Then tell us, Raymond. Tell us about Tom and Olivia Reynolds." A harsh laugh bounced off the stone walls. "Is that what this is about? Those two?" There was something unhinged in his tone. They were just the beginning. Backup officers arrived, surrounding the mine entrance. Donovan motioned them to hold position while he and Collins carefully advanced into the tunnel, flashlight beams sweeping the rough-hewn walls. 50 yards in, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. Raymond Mercer sat on a rusted ore cart, a revolver resting loosely in his hand. "That's far enough," he warned, raising the weapon slightly. "We know about the cabin, Raymond. Collins said evenly, keeping her gun trained on him. "We found your brother's body." Something flickered across Raymond's face. Pain, perhaps even grief. "Frank wasn't well. Never was after what our father did to us." He gestured vaguely with the revolver. "But he didn't kill those people. That was me." The confession hung in the air like smoke. Donovan's finger tensed on his trigger. "Why the Reynolds?" Collins asked, maintaining a calm facade despite her racing heart. "Why Tom and Olivia?" Raymond's hollow eyes seemed to look through her rather than at her. It wasn't about them specifically. It was about fathers and daughters. He paused, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "About breaking that bond. You targeted father-daughter pairs." Collins realized aloud. The other missing persons cases, they were all the same pattern. Raymond nodded slowly. Frank would watch them, learn their routines. He was good at being invisible. A twisted smile formed on his thin lips. But he couldn't do what needed to be done. He'd lose his nerve. "So I finished things." "What happened on the lake that day?" Donovan demanded, struggling to keep his professional demeanor. "I followed them out in another boat. Small motor, kept my distance until they reached the deepest part." Raymond's eyes took on a faraway look, reliving the memory. "I rammed them hard, cracked their hull. The man tried to save his daughter, but I hit him with an oar." The girl was screaming. Collins felt sick but pressed on. "Where are their bodies, Raymond?" A strange look crossed his face. "Bodies?" He laughed, a hollow, disturbing sound. "Oh, detective, that's the best part of the story." Before he could continue, a scuffling noise came from deeper in the mine shaft, a metal can rolling across stone. Raymond's head snapped toward the sound, momentarily distracted. Donovan seized the opportunity, lunging forward and tackling Raymond to the ground. The revolver discharged, the bullet ricocheting off the cave wall as Collins kicked the weapon from his hand. As they handcuffed the struggling man, Collins directed her flashlight toward the source of the noise. The beam illuminated a small opening in the back wall of the chamber, a narrow passage leading deeper into the mountain. "Sheriff," she called, her voice tight. "There's something back here." Leaving Raymond secured with the backup officers, Donovan joined Collins at the passage entrance. The opening was just wide enough for an adult to squeeze through. Cool air flowed from the darkness beyond. "Montana PD will have a forensic team here within the hour," Donovan said. "We should wait." Collins shook her head. "If there's someone back there." She didn't finish the sentence, already moving forward into the narrow tunnel. The passage extended about 30 feet before opening into another chamber, smaller than the first, but with an unnatural addition. A crude wooden door set into the far wall, secured with a heavy padlock. "Sheriff!" Collins called back, her flashlight revealing scratch marks on the door's surface. Donovan arrived moments later, breathing heavily from the tight squeeze. Together, they examined the lock. "Stand back," he ordered, drawing his weapon. 3 shots rang out, the sound deafening in the confined space. The padlock shattered. With gloved hands, Collins pulled the door open. The small room beyond had been carved out of the natural rock and reinforced with timber supports. A battery-powered lantern hung from the ceiling, its light long extinguished. A cot stood against one wall, a small table beside it. Empty food containers were stacked neatly in one corner, but it was the walls that seized their attention, covered with hundreds of tally marks scratched into the stone. "Someone was kept here," Collins whispered. "For a long time." Donovan's flashlight beam caught something else, a small wooden figure on the table. He approached slowly, recognition dawning as he picked it up. It was a hand-carved bird, a small chickadee, the kind Tom Reynolds was known to whittle for his daughter. "My God!" Donovan breathed, turning to Collins with shock etched on his face. What if they didn't die that day? Back in the main chamber, Raymond Mercer sat in handcuffs, a strange smile playing on his lips as more officers arrived. "You found my special place," he observed when Donovan and Collins emerged from the passage. "Did you like what you saw?" "Where are they, Raymond?" Donovan demanded, grabbing the man's shirt. "Where are Tom and Olivia Reynolds?" Raymond's smile widened. "I told you it was about breaking the bond between fathers and daughters." His eyes gleamed with malice. "The best way to do that is to keep them apart. Forever. You separated them," Collins realized, horror dawning. "Where's Olivia? Wouldn't you like to know?" Raymond taunted. 11 years is a long time, detective, long enough for a little girl to forget her own name. As Raymond was led away, Donovan and Collins exchanged grim looks. The case had just taken an unimaginable turn. If Tom and Olivia Reynolds had survived that day on the lake, where were they now? And after 11 years of captivity, would they even recognize the lives they once had? The answers would prove more heartbreaking than anyone could imagine. The confession came in fragments, Raymond Mercer revealing pieces of his twisted narrative between long silences and occasional bouts of maniacal laughter. The FBI had taken over the primary interrogation but allowed Donovan and Collins to observe from behind one-way glass. "We kept them in different minds," Raymond explained, seemingly proud of his methodology. "The father in Montana, the daughter in Wyoming. Close enough that I could manage both, far enough that they'd never find each other." He leaned forward, chains rattling. "Do you know what isolation does to the human mind, detective? How it warps reality?" Special Agent Hawkins, a veteran FBI interrogator, maintained an impassive expression. "Where is Tom Reynolds now?" Raymond's hollow eyes flickered with amusement. "Dead 3 years ago. Infection from a cut that wouldn't heal. I buried him outside the mine." Donovan pressed his palm against the glass, as if he could reach through and strangle the confession from Raymond's throat. Collins placed a steadying hand on his arm. "And Olivia?" Agent Hawkins pressed. Raymond's expression changed subtly, something almost like affection crossing his features. "My special one. So adaptable. Children are remarkable that way." "Where is she?" Hawkins repeated. "Safe," Raymond replied cryptically. "Where she's been for the past 5 years." The pieces slowly came together as Raymond continued his disjointed confession. According to him, Frank had indeed been watching the Reynolds family for months, developing an obsession with Olivia. But it was Raymond who orchestrated the attack on the lake, disabling their boat and knocking Tom unconscious. "Frank couldn't go through with it when the moment came," Raymond explained. "Weak, always weak, so I handled things. Instead of killing them, Raymond had transported the unconscious father and daughter to separate locations, Tom to the abandoned mine in Montana, Olivia to a similar setup in Wyoming. For 6 years he kept them prisoner, telling each that the other was dead. The girl cried for her father every night for months," Raymond recalled with disturbing detachment. "Then she stopped. They always stop eventually." As the interrogation continued, search teams coordinated efforts in both states. The Montana site quickly yielded results. Human remains discovered exactly where Raymond had indicated, tentatively identified as Tom Reynolds through dental records. The Wyoming location proved more complex. The mine Raymond described had partially collapsed years earlier, but no evidence of human habitation was found in the accessible areas. "He's playing games," Donovan concluded after the 3rd day of fruitless searching. "Olivia could be anywhere. If she's even alive." Collins wasn't convinced. "There's something we're missing. He's too specific about certain details, too vague about others." The breakthrough came when analysts processing Raymond's truck discovered a hidden compartment containing a stack of receipts from a grocery store in Cody, Wyoming, dated regularly over the past 5 years. The most recent was just 2 weeks old. "He said Olivia has been in the same place for 5 years, Collins noted, spreading the receipts across the conference table. "What if he meant she's not in the mine anymore?" The Cody Police Department provided address information for the store, allowing them to canvass the surrounding area. Security camera footage from the grocery store showed Raymond making purchases every 2 weeks like clockwork, always the same items: canned goods, bread, peanut butter, women's hygiene products, and occasionally clothing. "He's been caring for someone," Collins concluded. "Regularly, in or near Cody." Property records revealed that a cabin 3 miles outside Cody had been purchased 5 years earlier by a James Franklin, an obvious amalgamation of Frank Mercer's first and middle names. Local residents rarely saw the occupant, though occasionally mentioned a young woman glimpsed hanging laundry or tending a small garden. "She kept to herself," reported Mrs. Wilkins, who owned the nearest property a quarter-mile away. "I tried being neighborly when they first moved in, but the man, her uncle, he said, was clear they valued their privacy." The cabin stood isolated at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by pine trees. As law enforcement vehicles approached, Collins felt her heart hammering against her ribs. 11 years had passed since Olivia Reynolds disappeared at age 10. If she was indeed here, she would now be 21, a woman who had spent more than half her life in captivity. SWAT teams secured the perimeter while negotiators attempted contact via loudspeaker. No response came from the cabin. After 30 tense minutes, they moved in. The interior was meticulously organized, almost obsessively clean. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, living area with bookshelves full of well-worn paperbacks. A half-finished puzzle lay on the coffee table. Everything appeared normal until they noticed the steel reinforcements on the doors and windows, all lockable from the outside. A gilded cage. In the smaller bedroom, they found a journal on a neatly made bed. The first page bore a child's handwriting. My name is Olivia Reynolds. I am 10 years old. My daddy is Tom. My mommy is Ellen. I live in Pinewood, Wyoming. The same sentence was repeated on every page, hundreds of times, the handwriting maturing as the pages progressed. My name is Olivia Reynolds. I am 10 years old. My name is Olivia Reynolds. I am 10 years old. My name is Olivia Reynolds. I am 10 years old. She was trying not to forget, Collins whispered, tears threatening as she carefully bagged the journal as evidence. The search continued for hours, but the cabin was empty. No sign of Olivia Reynolds, though evidence confirmed someone had been living there recently. Raymond Mercer, when confronted with this discovery, merely smiled. You're too late. She's gone where you'll never find her. A regional alert was issued immediately. Every law enforcement agency in a 5-state area received Olivia's description, or rather, what they could piece together. Approximately 5'5", blonde hair, based on childhood photos, early 20s, possibly displaying signs of psychological trauma or Stockholm Syndrome. Ellen Reynolds flew to Cody, accompanied by a victim advocate and psychologist. The hope of finding her daughter alive after 11 years was both miraculous and terrifying. What would Olivia be like now? Would she even remember her mother? 4 days into the search, a bus station attendant in Billings, Montana, reported a young woman matching the description. Security footage showed a slender blonde purchasing a ticket to Seattle, constantly looking over her shoulder, wearing clothes that matched items missing from the cabin. That's her, Ellen confirmed, studying the grainy image. After 21 years as a mother, she recognized something in the young woman's posture, the way she held her shoulders, the slight tilt of her head. That's my Olivia. The Seattle Police Department was notified immediately. When the bus arrived at the downtown terminal, plainclothes officers were waiting. The young woman, traveling under the name Lisa Franklin, was approached carefully as she collected her single duffel bag from the luggage compartment. Olivia? A female officer said gently. Olivia Reynolds? The young woman froze, her body tensing like a cornered animal. For a moment it seemed she might run. Then, slowly, she turned. Nobody has called me that in a very long time, she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. Within hours, Ellen Reynolds was on a flight to Seattle, her hands trembling as the plane descended through cloud cover. The reunion would take place in a controlled environment with psychological support present. No one knew what to expect. In a quiet room at Seattle Presbyterian Hospital, Ellen waited, twisting a tissue between her fingers. When the door finally opened, she stood on unsteady legs. The young woman who entered bore little resemblance to the 10-year-old who had disappeared on Morrison Lake. Thin and pale, with hollow cheeks and watchful eyes, she stood uncertainly in the doorway. Only the small birthmark near her left eye confirmed what Ellen already knew in her heart. Olivia, Ellen breathed, taking a hesitant step forward. The young woman stared back, her expression a complex mixture of fear, confusion, and something else. A glimmer of recognition fighting through years of psychological conditioning. Mom? The word emerged as a question, fragile and uncertain. And then they were both crying, Ellen moving slowly to embrace her daughter, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Olivia didn't withdraw. Instead, she collapsed into her mother's arms, 11 years of loss pouring out in gut-wrenching sobs. Back in Wyoming, Raymond Mercer sat in his cell, a strange smile playing on his lips as he carved small wooden figures with his fingernails, an activity prison guards couldn't quite justify stopping. She'll come back to me, he told his court-appointed psychiatrist during their first evaluation. She always does. The doctor made a note in his file. Delusional, dangerous, no remorse. What no one realized yet was that Raymond Mercer's most sinister work had been psychological, not physical. And while Olivia Reynolds had been found, the question remained. After 11 years of captivity and manipulation, how much of her was truly left to save? The rehabilitation center outside Portland, Oregon, specialized in trauma recovery and reintegration. Set among towering pines with views of distant mountains, its peaceful grounds provided a stark contrast to the psychological warfare that had been Olivia Reynolds' reality for 11 years. Dr. Elaine Carver, the center's director and a leading expert in captivity trauma, had been working with Olivia for 3 months. Their sessions took place in a sunlit room with comfortable chairs and large windows, deliberately different from the confined spaces where Olivia had spent most of her life. "Tell me about your routine at the cabin," Dr. Carver prompted gently, her recorder capturing their conversation for later analysis. Olivia sat with her knees pulled to her chest, a defensive posture she defaulted to despite weeks of therapy. At 21, she appeared younger, her emotional development arrested by isolation and psychological manipulation. "Uncle Ray," she began, then stopped herself, a flash of shame crossing her features. Raymond. Raymond would wake me at exactly 6:30 every morning. I had 30 minutes to wash and dress before breakfast. And if you weren't ready, Olivia's gaze dropped to her hands. No food that day, and sometimes he would lock the bathroom for 24 hours. Dr. Carver made a note. What happened after breakfast? Lessons. Reading from books he selected. Writing in my journal. A distant look entered her eyes. He made me write my name over and over. My real name. He said it was so I wouldn't forget, but now I think he wanted to remind me of what he had taken. These therapy sessions revealed the complex psychological tactics Raymond had employed. For the first 6 years, he had kept Olivia in the mind, telling her that her father was dead and her mother had abandoned her. He portrayed himself as her savior and protector. He told me the outside world was dangerous. Olivia explained in another session that people were looking for me to hurt me. Eventually, I believed him. The move to the cabin had been presented as a reward for good behavior. More comfort, more space, even limited supervised trips outside, all contingent on absolute obedience. "Did you ever try to escape?" Ellen asked during one of her weekly visits, the question that had haunted her for months finally finding voice. Olivia stared out the window, her expression unreadable. Once, about 2 years ago, she absently rubbed a thin scar on her wrist. After that, I didn't try again. The FBI continued building their case against Raymond Mercer, uncovering evidence linking him to 3 other missing father-daughter pairs across the northwestern states. The remains of 2 additional victims were discovered based on his cryptic directions, seeming to take pleasure in revealing just enough information to keep investigators returning for more. Special Agent Hawkins visited the rehabilitation center in early August, seeking Olivia's formal statement. Despite Dr. Carver's reservations about her psychological readiness, Olivia insisted on cooperating. "He still has power if I stay silent," she explained, a new determination in her voice. The interview lasted 4 hours, Olivia methodically recounting her captivity in a detached, almost clinical manner, a coping mechanism Dr. Carver had observed in other trauma survivors. "He would talk about my father," Olivia revealed, her voice steady despite the pain behind her words. "Tell me how he was suffering, how he called for me. Then he would go away for days, and I'd be alone in the dark." "Did he tell you when your father died?" Hawkins asked gently. Olivia nodded. "He brought me a carved bird, one of my dad's. Said it was time to accept that I only had him now." Her composure cracked slightly. "I didn't believe him at first, but after a while, after years with no rescue, the psychological evaluation deemed Olivia competent to testify, though Dr. Carver warned prosecutors about the potential for setbacks. Her recovery isn't linear, she cautioned. Some days she's the 21-year-old woman she should be. Other days she reverts to the frightened 10-year-old who was taken. In September, Ellen Reynolds purchased a small house near the rehabilitation center, committed to being present for her daughter's recovery. The media attention had finally begun to wane, allowing them precious moments of normalcy, cooking dinner together, watching movies, carefully rebuilding the relationship that had been violently severed 11 years earlier. "Do you remember the butterfly garden we planted the summer before it happened?" Ellen asked one evening as they sat on the porch swing. A small smile touched Olivia's lips, a rare occurrence that Ellen treasured. Yellow marigolds and purple coneflowers. Dad built the trellis for the morning glories. These fragments of memory were victories, each one celebrated quietly. Yet for every step forward, there were complications. Olivia struggled with nightmares, panic attacks in confined spaces, and a persistent fear that Raymond would somehow find her again. "He said he'd always find me," she confessed during a particularly difficult therapy session. "That no matter where I went, he'd know, that we were connected." Dr. Carver leaned forward. "Olivia, that's a common tactic used by captors to maintain control even in their absence. Raymond Mercer is in a maximum security facility awaiting trial. He can't reach you." But something in Olivia's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. As fall progressed, Olivia began integrating select activities outside the center, a carefully planned process of reintroduction to normal society. She visited a local bookstore with her mother, attended a small farmer's market with Dr. Carver, and even expressed interest in taking an online college course. These positive developments were shattered on October 15th when Ellen arrived for their weekly dinner to find Olivia in the midst of a severe panic attack, curled in a corner of her room, breathing erratically. "He knows," she gasped between labored breaths. "He knows where I am." The cause was quickly identified, a letter that had somehow bypassed the center's screening protocols, addressed simply to "My Special One," with no return address. Inside was a small wooden carving of a chickadee, identical to the ones Tom Reynolds had made for his daughter. The FBI was immediately notified. Security footage showed a maintenance worker delivering the envelope along with regular mail, but the worker had no recollection of its origin. The carving itself contained no fingerprints, no DNA evidence, nothing to trace it back to Raymond Mercer, who remained securely incarcerated. Could someone be working with him? Ellen demanded during an emergency meeting with Agent Hawkins. Another accomplice? "We're investigating that possibility," Hawkins confirmed. "Raymond had a cellmate for 3 weeks before we separated them. We're looking into whether he could have passed along instructions." Olivia retreated into herself following the incident, refusing to leave her room for days. The progress of months seemed to evaporate overnight. During therapy, she reverted to monosyllabic responses, her posture once again defensive and guarded. He said this would happen. She finally confessed to Dr. Carver after a week of regression, that they'd find me, but that I'd never really be free of him, that I'd always belong to him. Dr. Carver maintained her professional demeanor despite her growing concern. "Olivia, we need to address something important. We need to address the psychological conditioning you experienced was extensive and sophisticated. Raymond created a dependency relationship that's difficult to break, but it can be broken." Olivia's gaze, usually averted during difficult conversations, met the doctor's directly. "What if I don't want it broken?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "What if I can't remember how to be anyone else?" The question crystallized the central challenge of Olivia's recovery. After 11 formative years under Raymond's influence, her identity had been shaped more by captivity than freedom. Her understanding of relationships, trust, even love had been distorted through the lens of her captor's manipulation. Security at the rehabilitation center was increased. Olivia was temporarily moved to a different room. Every piece of mail, every delivery was scrutinized. Yet despite these precautions, Olivia's fear remained palpable, a constant companion that threatened to undermine her fragile recovery. 2 weeks after the incident, Dr. Carver proposed a radical approach. "I think you need to confront him," she suggested during their session. "Not physically, but through a letter. Tell Raymond exactly what his actions took from you, what they cost you. Reclaim your narrative." The suggestion met initial resistance from both Ellen and the FBI. "She's not ready," Ellen insisted. "It could set her back even further." "Actually," Olivia interrupted quietly, "I want to do it." The letter took days to compose, each word carefully considered. Dr. Carver provided guidance, but insisted the content come entirely from Olivia. When completed, the 3-page document represented something powerful. Olivia Reynolds finding her voice after years of enforced silence. The letter was delivered to Raymond Mercer under controlled conditions, with no opportunity for response. Whether he read it or not would remain unknown, but the act of writing it proved transformative for Olivia. "I'm not his special one," she told Dr. Carver afterward, a new steadiness in her voice. "I'm Olivia Reynolds. I survived what he did to me, and I get to decide who I become now." It was a turning point, small but significant. The path ahead remained daunting, with setbacks inevitable, but for the first time since her rescue, Olivia glimpsed a future beyond the shadow of Raymond Mercer's influence. What no one anticipated was how dramatically that future would be tested in the coming weeks. The preliminary hearing for the state of Wyoming versus Raymond Mercer was scheduled for November 12th. Prosecutors had built a solid case, combining physical evidence, Raymond's partial confessions, and testimony from various experts. The final piece, Olivia's testimony, promised to be both the most compelling and the most challenging aspect of the proceedings. "You don't have to do this," Ellen reminded her daughter the evening before they were due to fly to Cheyenne. They sat in Olivia's room at the rehabilitation center, suitcases half-packed on the bed. "The prosecutor says they have enough without your direct testimony." Olivia folded a sweater with methodical precision, a habit developed during years when control over even the smallest actions was her only freedom. "I need to see him," she replied simply. "I need him to see me, not as his victim, but as someone who survived him." The courtroom was arranged to minimize trauma, with a privacy screen that would allow Olivia to testify without direct visual contact with Raymond. Dr. Carver would be present throughout, monitoring Olivia's psychological state. Every precaution had been taken to make the experience as manageable as possible. What no one could have predicted was Raymond Mercer's response to seeing Olivia enter the courtroom. "My special one," he called out, his voice carrying across the room before the bailiffs could silence him. "You've come back, just like I knew you would." Olivia froze momentarily, her carefully constructed composure threatening to crumble. Then, with visible effort, she straightened her shoulders and continued to the witness stand, her gaze deliberately avoiding the defendant's table. The testimony began with establishing facts: Olivia's identification of Raymond Mercer, confirmation of the timeline of her captivity, descriptions of the locations where she had been held. The prosecutor, District Attorney Melinda Chen, guided her gently through the initial questioning. "Ms. Reynolds," Chen asked, "can you describe the psychological tactics the defendant used during your captivity?" Olivia's voice remained steady as she detailed the calculated cruelty, isolation, intermittent rewards and punishments, fabricated stories about her family abandoning her, constant reinforcement of her dependence on Raymond. "He told me the world had forgotten me," she explained, "that no one was looking anymore. After years with no rescue, I started to believe him." Raymond's attorney, a public defender named James Kirkland, objected frequently but gained little traction. The judge, aware of the sensitive nature of the testimony, allowed Olivia considerable latitude in her responses. When cross-examination began, Kirkland adopted a sympathetic tone that poorly masked his strategic intent. "Ms. Reynolds, first let me say how deeply sorry I am for what you endured. No one should experience such trauma." Olivia nodded slightly, her expression guarded. "During your captivity, particularly in the later years at the cabin, you had some freedoms, correct? You were occasionally permitted outside. Even accompanied my client to stores?" "Yes," Olivia confirmed. "Yet you never attempted to call for help during these outings, never tried to run away or alert authorities. Why is that?" DHN rose immediately. "Objection. This line of questioning blames the victim for her own captivity. I'm establishing the psychological state of the witness," Kirkland countered. "It's relevant to her testimony. I'll allow it," the judge ruled, "but tread carefully, counselor." Olivia leaned toward the microphone. "I can answer," she said, her voice stronger than anyone had heard it since her rescue. "I didn't try to escape because I believed what he told me, that I had nowhere to go, that no one was looking for me anymore, that he was protecting me from a world that wanted to hurt me." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But more than that, I was afraid. Every time I showed the smallest defiance, there were consequences. Not just for me, but—" her voice faltered slightly. "He would leave for days, telling me he was visiting my father, telling me that my behavior determined how my father was treated." Kirkland pressed on. "So you're saying that over 11 years, you never had an opportunity to escape? That seems—" "Objection," Chen interrupted. "Badgering the witness." "Sustained," the judge ruled firmly. Throughout the questioning, Raymond Mercer sat unnaturally still, his hollow eyes fixed on Olivia with an intensity that seemed to physically push against the privacy screen separating them. Occasionally, his lips would move silently, as if carrying on a private conversation. During a brief recess, Dr. Carver checked on Olivia's mental state. "You're doing incredibly well," she assured her, "but we can stop anytime you need to." Olivia shook her head. "I'm almost done. I can finish this." When testimony resumed, Kirkland shifted tactics, attempting to undermine Olivia's credibility by highlighting inconsistencies in her earlier statements to investigators, details that any trauma survivor might struggle to recall consistently. "You initially told investigators that you were kept in the mine for about 5 years, but later said it was 6 years, he noted. "Which is it?" Olivia didn't falter. Time was difficult to track, especially in the beginning. There was no natural light in the mine. Days blended together. "And yet you're certain about other details from that same period?" "Some moments are burned into my memory," Olivia replied quietly. "Others are fragmented." As the cross-examination continued, Raymond's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He began whispering to his attorney, who appeared increasingly uncomfortable. At one point, Raymond attempted to stand before being firmly directed back to his seat by the bailiff. The final question from Kirkland attempted to exploit the psychological dependence Raymond had cultivated. Ms. Reynolds, is it possible that over time, your relationship with Mr. Mercer became more complex than you're suggesting? That perhaps you developed feelings of objection? Chen's voice cut through the courtroom like a whip. This is outrageous, Your Honor. Before the judge could rule, Olivia leaned forward. I know what you're implying, she said directly to Kirkland, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. You want to call it Stockholm Syndrome, to suggest I formed an attachment to him. What I formed was a survival strategy. She turned slightly, addressing the court rather than the attorney. Every day for 11 years I made choices to stay alive, to preserve enough of myself that I might someday find my way back. Those choices included pretending to accept my situation, pretending to be grateful for small kindnesses that came after deliberate cruelties. Her gaze shifted toward Raymond, though the screen prevented direct eye contact. He wanted to erase Olivia Reynolds and create someone else, someone who belonged to him. The fact that I'm sitting here today, testifying against him, proves he failed. The courtroom fell silent. Even Kirkland seemed momentarily at a loss for words. No further questions, he finally stated, returning to his seat. As Olivia stepped down from the witness stand, Raymond suddenly lunged forward, evading his attorney's restraining hand. Tell them the truth, he shouted, his voice raw with emotion. Tell them how you came back to me every time. Tell them how you chose to stay. Bailiffs quickly restrained him, but his words hung in the air like poison. Olivia paused, turning slowly to face her captor directly for the first time since entering the courtroom. I never chose you, she said clearly, each word deliberate and distinct. You stole my childhood, my father, and 11 years of my life, but you don't get to steal my truth. The outburst resulted in Raymond being removed from the courtroom and the proceedings adjourned until the following day. Outside, reporters clustered on the courthouse steps, cameras flashing as Ellen guided her daughter toward their waiting car. That evening in their hotel room, the emotional toll of the day finally caught up with Olivia. She sat motionless on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing, her body trembling with delayed shock. You were incredible today, Ellen said softly, sitting beside her daughter without touching her, having learned through painful experience that unexpected contact could trigger flashbacks. I saw his face, Olivia whispered. For years I could only imagine what he looked like when he wasn't with me, what he was doing, who else he might be hurting. Seeing him in handcuffs controlled by others, it should feel like victory. But it doesn't, Ellen prompted gently. Olivia shook her head. It feels unfinished, like there's something else I need to know, something I'm missing. Neither of them could have anticipated how prophetic those words would prove to be, or that the most shocking revelation in the case of Raymond Mercer was yet to come. The second day of preliminary hearings began with an unexpected development. The prosecution requested a closed session, excluding the public and media. Judge Margaret Wilson granted the motion despite objections from the defense, clearing the courtroom except for essential personnel, Olivia, Ellen, and Dr. Carver. District Attorney Chen approached the bench, her expression grave. Your Honor, new evidence has come to light that significantly impacts this case. Given its sensitive nature, we believe it should be presented in closed session to protect the privacy of the victims. Raymond Mercer sat with uncharacteristic stillness, his hollow eyes fixed on a point somewhere in the middle distance. His attorney leaned close, whispering urgently, but Raymond showed no reaction. Proceed, Ms. Chen, the judge directed. The prosecutor gestured to Special Agent Hawkins, who approached the witness stand carrying a sealed evidence bag. Agent Hawkins, please explain what investigators discovered yesterday, Chen prompted. Hawkins placed the evidence bag on the small table beside the stand. Following Mr. Mercer's outburst yesterday, we executed an additional search warrant on a storage unit registered to him in Casper, Wyoming. Inside, we found this journal. He removed a leather-bound book from the evidence bag, handling it with gloved hands. This journal appears to have been kept by Frank Mercer, the defendant's brother, from approximately 1985 until his death in 1992. The contents... Hawkins paused, glancing briefly toward Olivia. The contents reveal a pattern of behavior far more extensive and disturbing than we initially understood. The journal was entered into evidence. Key passages highlighted for the court's review. As Chen read selected excerpts aloud, the horrifying truth gradually emerged. The Mercer brothers had been abducting father-daughter pairs since the early 1980s, at least 6 cases before the Reynolds. Their pattern was always the same: isolate the victims, separate them, break their spirits through psychological torture, then eventually eliminate the fathers while keeping the daughters in captivity. What no one had suspected, what Raymond had never revealed during interrogation, was that Olivia Reynolds had not been his only living captive. According to this journal, Chen explained, her voice carefully controlled, at the time of his arrest, Raymond Mercer was holding 3 women in different locations throughout Wyoming and Montana. All were abducted as children with their fathers. All were kept isolated for years, conditioned to depend on their captor, and led to believe their families had abandoned them. Ellen gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. Olivia sat perfectly still, her face pale but composed. "Where are these women now?" Judge Wilson asked, her judicial detachment momentarily slipping. "We've located 2 of them," Hawkins responded. Ashley Kramer, abducted at age 12 in 1983, was found in a cabin outside Bozeman, Montana. Michelle Donahue, taken at age 9 in 1988, was living in a converted basement apartment in Sheridan, Wyoming. Both women were registered with neighbors as Raymond Mercer's nieces. Both exhibited similar psychological conditioning to Ms. Reynolds. "And the third?" the judge pressed. Hawkins shook his head. "We're still searching. The journal indicates she would be Patricia Wells, abducted with her father in 1991 from Idaho. According to Frank's notes, she was initially kept in an abandoned hunting lodge in the Sawtooth Mountains." Raymond finally reacted, a thin smile spreading across his face. "You'll never find Patty," he said softly, his voice carrying in the silent courtroom. "She's the special one now." The judge immediately ordered him removed, but the damage was done. The implication was clear. Somewhere a 4th victim remained hidden, perhaps unaware that help was even possible. As Raymond was escorted out, he turned toward Olivia. "They'll never understand what we had," he called. "What we still have." Olivia stood suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. "We had nothing," she responded, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "What you had was power over a child who couldn't escape. What you have now is nothing." The courtroom fell silent as Raymond was led away, his strange smile never faltering. When proceedings resumed an hour later, the prosecution presented their final evidence, maps and notes found in the storage unit indicating the possible locations where Patricia Wells might be held. Search teams were already being dispatched to the most promising sites. The preliminary hearing concluded with Judge Wilson finding ample cause to proceed to trial. Raymond Mercer was ordered held without bail, facing multiple charges of kidnapping, false imprisonment, psychological torture, and murder. Outside the courthouse, Ellen and Olivia faced a barrage of reporters, their questions overlapping in a cacophony of shouted inquiries. Dr. Carver attempted to shield them, guiding them toward the waiting car. "How does it feel knowing you weren't his only victim? Did you suspect there were others? Will you meet with the other survivors?" Olivia paused at the car door, turning to face the media with unexpected composure. "I have only one statement," she said clearly. "To Patricia Wells, if you can hear this, they're looking for you. You're not forgotten. And what he told you, all of it, was a lie." The Rehabilitation Center established a specialized program for the survivors of Raymond Mercer, creating a safe environment where Ashley, Michelle, and Olivia could receive both individual therapy and group support. Though their experiences differed in details, the fundamental trauma they shared created a unique bond, an understanding no one else could fully comprehend. "He told me my father abandoned me," Ashley revealed during their first group session, her voice soft from years of enforced quiet. At 47, she had spent 35 years, most of her life, under Raymond's control, that he'd chosen his new family over me. Michelle nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Me too. He showed me newspaper clippings about the search being called off. Said it proved no one cared enough to keep looking. He made each of us believe we were special," Olivia observed, "that we were chosen, but really we were just convenient, available, the daughters of men he wanted to destroy." The search for Patricia Wells intensified as winter descended on the Rocky Mountains. Helicopter surveys, ground teams with cadaver dogs, and local volunteers combed the remote areas identified in Frank Mercer's journal. The weather complicated efforts, with early snowfall making many locations nearly inaccessible. In December, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Michelle Donahue, during a therapy session, suddenly recalled Raymond mentioning a sister living near water. He would bring her gifts when he went away, Michelle explained. Said she needed extra care because she wasn't as strong as me. The search narrowed to locations near lakes and rivers. On December 18th, A small cabin was discovered on the shore of Jackson Lake, its existence obscured by dense pine forest and absent from property records. The structure appeared abandoned, windows boarded from the inside. When officers breached the door, they found evidence of recent habitation, food supplies, clothing, a still warm wood stove, but no Patricia Wells. It was Olivia who suggested the possibility that had eluded investigators. She might have run when she heard about Raymond's arrest, she proposed during a briefing with Agent Hawkins. If she saw it on TV or overheard something, she might be hiding because she's afraid. Afraid of what? Hawkins asked. Olivia's expression reflected years of conditioned fear. Everything, everyone. The world Raymond told her was dangerous. The people he said would hurt her if they found her. A new approach was implemented, gentler, more patient. Instead of tactical teams, female officers in plain clothes monitored the cabin from a distance. Supplies were left, food, warm clothing. Notes explaining that Raymond had been arrested, that he couldn't hurt anyone anymore. 3 days before Christmas, motion sensors indicated movement inside the cabin. Rather than rushing in, officers waited, maintaining their distance while keeping the location under surveillance. On Christmas Eve, a thin wisp of smoke rose from the chimney. And on Christmas morning, Patricia Wells, aged 42 but appearing much younger, with the uncertain movements of someone unused to freedom, stepped onto the cabin's small porch and raised her hand in tentative greeting to the officers she'd been watching from behind curtains for days. Her recovery would be the most challenging. Abducted at age 8, she had spent 34 years, over 80% of her life, in captivity. Her understanding of the world was formed almost entirely through Raymond Mercer's distorted lens. The new year brought both challenges and progress. As preparations for Raymond's trial continued, the 4 survivors faced difficult decisions about their willingness to testify. Ashley, the oldest, declined, the prospect of facing her captor too overwhelming after 35 years of psychological conditioning. Michelle and Patricia remained undecided, working through their trauma and therapy before committing either way. Olivia, however, remained resolute. "I need to finish what I started," she explained to Dr. Carver. "Not just for me, but for all of us. For my father." In February, as snow still blanketed the mountains around Morrison Lake, Olivia asked to visit the place where everything had begun. Ellen accompanied her, along with Dr. Carver and Agent Hawkins. They stood on the weathered dock where Tom and Olivia Reynolds had set out on a summer morning 11 years earlier. "I remember being so excited about fishing," Olivia said softly, looking out across the frozen lake. "Dad was teaching me to bait my own hook." Ellen slipped her hand into her daughter's. "He was so proud of you. Every day." Olivia nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks in the winter air. "For years, I held on to memories of him. Then, slowly, they started to fade. Raymond would tell me things, that Dad had forgotten me, abandoned me, and I'd try to remember his face, his voice, to know it wasn't true. But eventually, it's a normal response to trauma," Dr. Carver assured her. "The mind protects itself by numbing certain memories, especially when they cause pain. I want to remember him clearly again," Olivia said, determination in her voice. "Not just through photographs or stories, but really remember." That evening, back at Ellen's house, they went through old family albums. Ellen shared stories of Tom, his terrible singing voice, his passion for woodworking, how he'd proposed to her on this very lake. "He carved a little box in the shape of a heart," Ellen recalled, smiling through tears. "The ring was inside. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it in the water." Slowly, through these shared memories and her continued therapy, Olivia began reclaiming pieces of her past, reconstructing the life and relationships that Raymond Mercer had tried to erase. March brought Raymond Mercer's trial. In the face of overwhelming evidence, including Frank's journal, physical evidence from multiple crime scenes, and testimony from 3 of his 4 living victims, he was convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced him to multiple consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. As he was led from the courtroom, Raymond turned toward Olivia one final time. "You'll always be my special one," he called, his hollow eyes seeking hers across the crowded room. Olivia stood, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I was never yours," she replied clearly. "And now, neither are you." Those words marked a turning point, not just for Olivia, but for all the survivors. The road ahead remained challenging, with recovery measured not in days or weeks, but in years. Yet with each small victory, Patricia learning to shop for herself, Michelle reconnecting with distant relatives, Ashley planting her first garden. Hope grew. In June, 1 year after the discovery of Tom Reynolds' oar in the mud of Morrison Lake, Olivia enrolled in college courses, her chosen major, psychology, with a focus on trauma recovery. "I want to understand what happened to me," she explained to Dr. Carver, "and maybe someday help others understand their own experiences." On the anniversary of her rescue, Olivia visited her father's grave for the first time since his remains had been properly buried. She brought a small wooden bird, a chickadee she had carved herself, the skill inherited but the creation entirely her own. "I kept my promise, Dad," she whispered, placing the carving on the headstone. "I never forgot who I was." "Not really." Ellen waited at a respectful distance, giving her daughter the privacy of this moment. When Olivia finally turned away from the grave, something in her posture had changed. A straightening of the shoulders, a lifting of the chin. "Ready to go home?" Ellen asked as Olivia reached her. Olivia nodded, casting one last glance at the grave. "Yes," she said softly. "I think I am." As they walked through the cemetery gates, Olivia paused, looking up at the clear summer sky. So similar to that July day 11 years earlier, yet belonging to an entirely different life. "The hardest part," she reflected, "isn't what happened to me. It's accepting that I'll never know exactly who I would have been without it." Ellen squeezed her daughter's hand gently. "You're exactly who you were always meant to be. Someone who survived the unsurvivable. Someone who found her way back." Together they continued down the path, leaving behind the shadow of what had been lost and walking toward the uncertain but open possibility of what still remained to be found.